We will end tonight with a presentation from Rob Vollmar, a USAO grad, a writer, a musician, an all-around great guy, who will bring to us a story of dangerous descent, a record store, and such fantastic music that I should probably just go sit down because it can speak for itself.
So the name of my presentation tonight is Music is the Weapon of the Future. And that's a quote that comes from Fela himself. Fela Kuti is a singular figure in the history of popular music in that he played an integral role in the very dangerous game of Nigerian politics during the 1970s and 1980s. He also pioneered an entire genre of music called Afrobeat that continues to attract musicians and fans to this day. To understand how Fela was able to advocate for social justice in a time when his dissent was, for anyone else, would have been a death sentence by disappearance, we'll need to learn just a little bit about his family, as well as Nigeria's original short-lived post-colonial democracy. Fela was born Olufela Ransom Kuti. He was the second son of Olutadun and Funumalayo Ransom Kuti. His family was very wealthy, and they were very politically well-connected in the waning years of British colonial occupation. His father was a minister and a school administrator. His mother was one of the key figures in organizing women to resist colonial rule and advocating for equal rights for women within an eventual emergent democracy. Now, when Fela graduated from high school, he actually followed a long-standing colonial tradition and used his family's status to travel to England in 1958, where he studied music at the Trinity College of Music in London. He actually told his father he was going to study medicine, but he just enrolled in the music school instead, and eventually Dad found out it didn't work out too well. He remained abroad until 1963, whereupon he returned to Nigeria and began performing in a large combo style of music called palm wine, and studied to work in radio. Now, Nigeria became independent of British rule in 1960, but like Iraq, which had also been colonized by the British, it was inherently politically unstable due to the hundreds of different ethnic groups that were artfully drawn within its imaginary borders, and who were all too hostile to one another to sort of coalesce into a functioning political entity. So within 6 years of independence, the country descended into what is known as the Biafran War, and would emerge from that bitter civil war under the yoke of a military government that would persist on and off until the late 1990s. The complete disruption of Nigerian political and social life essentially drove Fela out of the country. First to Ghana in 1967, and then in 1969 he came to the United States. Now, interestingly, when he came to the United States, he came under the philosophical sway of a Black Panthers member whose name was Susan Isadora. And even as he was aggressively incorporating musical ideas from African-American musical icons like James Brown and Parliament, he was also incorporating philosophical ideas that he absorbed from Susan. And in doing this, he created a new style of music called Afrobeat, and he infused it with a militant brand of Pan-Africanism that it was unheard of in Nigerian music of his day. In fact, Nigerian popular music of his day was designed to distract people from the difficulties politically going on in the country at the time. Fela instead made the difficulties the subject of his songs, which was a complete reversal. Fela's life and his music and his message were carefully orchestrated to resonate as a unified rejection of the status quo of the times and the place in which he lived. His first rebellion was against his own upbringing, and he renounced Christianity as just one of many tools that were employed to subjugate African peoples to European imperial power. He dropped the ransom part of his name, which had actually been taken on by the family to make this seem more respectable to the British occupying authorities in the 19th century, and he adopted a new middle name, Anukulapo, which means he who carries death in his pouch. Culturally, that basically means you can't kill me unless I say it's okay. Bold maneuver. He began openly practicing an animistic religion that was based on the Yoruba traditions prior to colonization, or the best that he could approximate them, and in fact flouted sexual mores of the time, at one point marrying all 27 members of his female chorus of his band. When he returned to Nigeria in 1970, he founded a commune in Lagos, which he called the Kalakuta Republic, and then he declared it independent from the illegal state of Nigeria. His argument being, the government is illegitimate, so if I want to create another illegitimate government in the middle of that illegitimate government, who's to tell me no? Within this republic, he created a performance venue that was called the Shrine. And it was from this stage that he delivered blistering musical sermons that would last until the sun was rising to any and all Nigerians who would make the pilgrimage. In the area where the Republic was and the Shrine was, he would employ hundreds of people to work for him directly, and would recruit young men with no musical training whatsoever to apprentice within the band, which was very large. You could do that. You're gonna be, well, you play the 6th guitar tonight. Okay, you know. And that made him basically untouchable in that space, because even when the police would show up to try to bust him for any number of things, he would know, you know, hours beforehand, because of the sort of the zones of protection that he had created for himself. In a way, his music and his cult of personality had a curious, perhaps unintended healing effect on the ethnic tensions that had fueled the Civil War, because his popularity cut across tribal boundaries. And within the Republic and within the Shrine, basically Fela's law ruled supreme. So if there was actually a dispute between two people that arose, they would bring it to Fela, and Fela would solve the problem. He also made a common enemy for all Nigerians out of the illegal military governments and the Western financial powers that kept them propped up. Fela also employed a very interesting creative process that actually contributed to the effectiveness of his messaging. He would perform a song live for months, sometimes years, before he would ever record it. And then he would never perform it live again. So this means that whatever he was saying about the government, they would be hearing second and third hand, and by the time that they were able to hear it firsthand by listening to it in a recording, all the ideas that were contained within it had been circulating among his fans and followers for months, and in some cases years. 1977, when Fela recorded his most famous song, which is called Zombie. I don't have that on vinyl yet. Working on it. So we won't be listening to it right now. I'm very sorry. It's also 23 minutes long. So this scathing rebuke of the heavy-handed tactics that were used to quell dissent in the country compared the soldiers who carried out these illegal orders from the government, basically compared them to zombies. And in retaliation, government forces, under orders from General Olusegun Obasanjo, raided the Republic with over 1,000 men. Fela himself was beaten nearly to death, and his mother, beloved figure of the early democracy of Nigeria, was thrown out of a third-story window. She died from her injuries within 6 months. Now, at first, Fela seemed to benefit creatively from this attack on his person, releasing some of the strongest material of his career in the wake of the attack, including the song I'm going to play a little bit of for you right now, which is called Sorrow, Tears, and Blood, and it recounts the details of the attack and the seas with the stony fury. I'll tell you in advance that even though he really is talking about the attack, Fela's lyrics, which was also sort of a revolutionary thing at the time, were delivered in a broken English, what he called it. And so there could be Igbo words in there, Yoruba words, Swahili words, English words, French words, and so all the people on the street could perfectly understand what he was saying, and other people could not. He's obviously the band leader, band organizer. He's writing all the music. Like, and when I say writing it, I don't mean he's just like, I know you play this. Like, he physically wrote things out. He played the trumpet, he played the saxophone, and he played the keyboard. And on every song, he would do all three of those things. So when you watch his live performances, he'll just move from station to station, and then so there'll be a saxophone solo, and while he puts his saxophone down, maybe the chorus will do something, and then he'll move over to the keyboard and start taking a solo there, and then somebody else will do something, and then he'll get to the microphone. So it was really quite a musical tour de force, not even considering the time involved in writing the lyrics, composing the music, organizing the financial activity to make sure that all of these things take place in a timely fashion, organizing the security detail to make sure that people don't kill each other inside of these physical spaces. It was really quite an impressive undertaking. After the attack on the shrine, Fela's aura of invincibility to some degree was shattered. Like, if you're like, you can't kill me unless I want you to, and then you come in and you beat him nearly to death, like well, we could just come and beat you all the way to death. It's also important to, for Fela fans and scholars who are sort of being honest with himself, that attack kind of destroyed his mind. His mental state became much more frail from that point on. He started making a lot more questionable decisions. Around 1980, after Obasanjo's curating the imaginary government, they decided they were going to have an election in another democracy. So Fela's like, okay, I'm going to run for president. In fact, in Nigeria, Fela is still known today as the Black President. That's what they called him. He was eventually, they said, you can't run for president because you're a criminal, because we beat you. So that didn't work out so well. He was jailed again in 1984 on some genuinely flimsy charges of currency smuggling. Nothing he was really involved with. But he spent 20 months in prison before he was granted amnesty by the man who's literally the current president of Nigeria right now, Muhammadu Buhari. So after that term, his influence in Nigerian public sphere waned to a certain extent. So he had rebuilt the republic, he rebuilt the shrine, but he was never really able to reach the kind of international superstar status that some African musicians like King Sunny Ade or Ladysmith Black Mambazo were able to reach in the 1980s. Have Paul Simon to come in and do that thing Paul Simon did. His hostile attitude towards Western governments and business interests, in tandem with his complete unwillingness to play music that he had already recorded, made him a very difficult sell to foreign audiences. So after a few abortive attempts to market him abroad, Fela's output musically waned and finally came to an end with his last album in 1989. He was again arrested, this time for murder under equally flimsy circumstances that were motivated by the political maneuverings of then perhaps the worst of the Nigerian dictators, Sani Abacha. He was eventually absolved of those charges as well, but after that, he all but disappeared from public view. Now, the reason that was rumored but never proven until his death was that Fela had contracted HIV. In 1997, Fela died of AIDS. Now, rather than hiding the cause of his death, his family, including his brother, who was the Surgeon General of Nigeria at the time, used his death as an opportunity to show that anyone, no matter how famous or how well-connected or how very obviously heterosexual, because of Fela's reputation as a ladies' man, could contract the disease, and used his legacy to spearhead an awareness campaign that went a long way towards destigmatizing HIV in Nigeria. Now, the 2 decades since Fela's death has seen actually a considerable rehabilitation of his status as both a groundbreaking musician and composer and as a force for social justice in Nigeria. Just very briefly, I heard about Fela for the first time about 6 months after he died. I visited my mother, who was living in Seattle at the time. She lived up on Capitol Hill, and there was a little African import shop not too far from where she lived. And I walked in, I was on vacation, I was looking at stuff, and they started playing some Fela over the speakers, and I was like, what is that? Like, how do I not? That's amazing. How do I not already know what that is? Most of Fela's records were never widely available outside of Nigeria, and in fact were sold door to door. There was such a demand for them. They could be like, hey, Fela's new record. People were like, great, I'll take it. But for the most part, his records were, a few of them were picked up by French labels in the 70s, but they were never available in the United States. So it was very fortunate for me that I happened to be in just the right place at just the right time to be able to pick up some of these releases that were coming out on CD. Now, Fela's entire back catalog of recordings, as I said, which were once only sporadically available in the West, it's all available, which has allowed music scholars to study his impressive body of work in a more systematic fashion. In 2008, there was a musical called Fela, opened off-Broadway to mass acclaim and gained backing from musicians Will Smith and Jay-Z, that opened a 3-year run on Broadway and actually garnered 12 Tony nominations in 2012. There's a documentary called Finding Fela, incorporating footage from the musical with clips that were shot during his lifetime. That was released in 2014 to broad acclaim at Sundance. 2 of his sons, of which he has many, Femi and Seun, have picked up his mantle and have continued to elevate his legacy in Nigeria and beyond. Femi has reopened the Shrine. It's actually not the same place as it was, but he's opened a club called the Shrine where he performs every night in Lagos and has taken his father's place as a social critic, not quite as crazy of a social critic as Fela was, but he does serve that role and plays an important role of nurturing local talent like his father did. While Seun actually has made a couple of recordings with members of Fela's original band. The fragile return of democracy to Nigeria has been an ironic experience, as the majority of the men who have been elected to the presidency are actually former military dictators with whom Fela regularly clashed, including President Obasanjo and the current president, Muhammadu Buhari. The rise of Boko Haram in the northern part of Nigeria has raised the specter of another civil war, even as Nigeria is poised to become the economic powerhouse of Western Africa. It seems that the fault lines of power in Nigeria remain buried in this ability of strong men to mobilize large segments of the population in opposition to one another. And time will only tell if Fela's message of Pan-Africanism, which means it's more important that we're an African than we're this kind of African or that kind of African, whether that message and his public ridicule of government corruption can win out over the influence of forces, both internal and external, that seem to massage Nigeria into a state of perpetual conflict. Thank you very much.